It's great to have you here. What a great turnout for Zoroastrianism on a Tuesday night in LA. That's awesome. Most people don't even know about this religion, so much respect for showing up. Um, Forgive me for repeating if you've been here, but I think there's some new faces here. My name is Greg Salyer. I'm the Dean of Students here at the University of Philosophical Research, this School of Fancy Book Learning. And what we do here is study wisdom. We study philosophy the way it was intended, the way it originally meant, as the study of wisdom, the love of wisdom, actually. And we look for it everywhere we can find it. So we don't stay in one tradition or one place in the world or one place in our heads. We go down to our hearts and wherever else we can find wisdom. There are some materials out on the table that look so beautiful you may think you should buy them, but they're actually free. Our director of publicity, Michelle Song, does those, and they're just gorgeous, but they're free. So there's some pamphlets out there that are actual courses, so you can see what an actual course looks like online. And there's some other information there about the university. So again, welcome. It's good to have you here. So just to repeat briefly what we're doing here. We've been going through the world's religions, and we now turn tonight to the Western religions, finally. And you might notice that we've been going chronologically as best one can with these topics. So Western religion is late to the game, so to speak. If you talk in terms of thousands of years, it's relatively late. What we also do is look through lenses at these religions. So these lenses are drawn from the study of religion itself to give us a way to be more objective about the religion we're studying, to be more comparative, to see things, again, the emphasis is visual, through the lenses that maybe we wouldn't see otherwise. Again, these lenses come at a cost, because I'm not going to talk about the whole history of the religion. I'm not going to talk about all the adherents and all the various expressions of the religion. I'm going to give that up in order to give you both a sense of how to study religion objectively and comparatively, and then hopefully you can do the rest on your own, because there's a lot out there to do. So that's what we've been doing, and tonight we fall upon the last of our lenses. So we did a lecture and discussion just on the nature of religion. Then we talked about the sacred in relation to Native American religions. Then we talked about, excuse me, myth in relation to Hinduism. And as you can see here, these lenses are not unrelated to the religion. Ritual in Buddhism, and then the notion of religious community and community itself in relation to Chinese religions. So tonight we come to the individual, right? This is actually the way most of us in the room, I think, would understand religion and see it, experience it, because we're either Westerners or we're living in this culture which is based on Western ideology and therefore based on individualism. However, this is a relatively new concept. Again, looking at it in terms of thousands of years, the individual is a relatively new idea. Now, we could argue for days and through books, many books, about when the notion of the individual arose, and I'm not really interested in that. My only point is that to think of oneself as an individual is not a given. In fact, I think of Vine Deloria Jr. Remember we talked about his book, God is Red, and the nature of the sacred. And he said, there is no salvation in Native American religions apart from the continuance of the tribe itself. And we might even add, of the planet itself. So you see there's always something bigger, and from that bigger thing, individuals have drawn their identity. Tribe, clan, family group, whatever. Again, I don't want to make this an absolute, but generally, across the world, the notion of the individual is a relatively new thing. We could trace it to Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. The basis of epistemology is you, for Descartes, and then he goes to God in his process. So there's the individual and God, and only third comes the world itself. That was a watershed moment. There are others. One could argue that Socrates introduced the notion of the individual. I'm not interested in that argument. I'm interested in the religious concept of the individual and how it functions. And one of the things that it provides is, like I said, salvation, an individual salvation, not the salvation of a people, the chosen people, or the other people, like the Dene, which is the Navajo word that simply means the people. So that's what we've had, is these groups or peoples, even nations. But now we're talking about individuals. And so individual salvation, that's a different thing. Now, we talked about how these lenses relate to each other. So there's the sacred experience of the holy other, right, that the founders have, that is a radical break with reality and introduces a whole new world to this world, and is characterized by awe and fear more than pleasant, warm feelings. We talked about how this experience cannot exist alone, or it can, but it's not very useful, that the founder has to come back to the world. And when he comes back to the world, he has to tell the story. That's myth, right? To tell the story. We talked about how these stories are not helpful unless they're alive, unless they're enacted, right? That's ritual. And then we talked about how these beliefs, practices come into a sacred space to create community. So beliefs, practices, and space create a community. Or the religious term is communitas. We like to use Latin for some reason. But think about that. Even in non-individualistic religions, there were individual acts for a rite of passage. So, for example, you may know about the Vision Quest, practice among the Plains Indians, for example, practice among a lot of peoples, Australians, etc., Aboriginal Australians, where usually the young man is taken away from the community. This is a rite of passage. It's usually a passage from boyhood to manhood. So the individual is taken away from the community. Of course, the experiences vary, but basically it's an isolation ritual where you have no more support. You don't have the support that you've had in the community. You must face something dramatic, traumatic, possibly your own death. Then you come back to the community. Once you do that, you share an experience, right? You've put your body in touch with the sacred, which we defined as the definition of ritual. Putting your body in touch with the sacred. So the individual path, the way, is there even in communal religions, but it's usually done in the sense of entry into the community. We talked about this last time, how the community has to mark itself internally and externally. We're not like them because we do this and they do that. And at the same time, internally, we look around at our religious community and we nod because we know the experience that we've had, that probably our founder has had in some form. But with the advent of the individual, wherever you mark it, Descartes or otherwise, if you have an individual and you have an individual path to salvation apart from the community, apart from a specifically defined community, well then your way, your path is every day and your own community. That's kind of where we are now in our culture because of the birth of individualism with Romanticism or Descartes or whoever. And I think you know this, I think you probably feel this, I think you probably experience this, may even be why you're here. So we no longer go away from what we know and encounter death and danger to find out who we are. We just live, kind of think about things maybe, trying to figure out our path, right? Because that's the thing with the individualistic notion of religion, and this borrows from Romanticism, by the way, is that you are a unique person, that you have experiences other people don't have, and that your way is uniquely yours. You can draw upon other stories, sure, and you will, but your path is yours. No one else on the planet is going to walk your path. That's pretty seductive, isn't it? That's why it works, because it automatically elevates you to a religious experience just by virtue of being alive here in this culture with this set of assumptions, with this mythology at work. Very powerful. But what it does is it kind of collapses the notion of community and of the sacred. Remember, we talked about the sacred being this holy other, this experience of tremendous mystery and fascination. Well, that's gone, really. I mean, you can have them along the way, but they might well happen at a bar or at a kiva or something, because it's your path, so you go where you go, and you find the sacred in that path, wherever it is. The community's not there necessarily. Sure, you may have some friends you want to tell about it, but I mean, what's that mean to them? That's your path, right? So maybe they're interested. Maybe they try to draw from your path to illuminate theirs, but it's limited. It's going to be limited. Again, if you're functioning with this ideology of the individual, as we all are in one way or another here now in Western culture, it changes everything that we've been talking about in terms of the nature of religion and religious experience. So now, the way of the Tao, you don't have to find it, you're there. Because you're an individual, living. Jesus, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. You're already there, because you're an individual. I don't mean to denigrate this position. I just want to mark how different it is from the religions that we've been studying and in the context that we've been studying them. Yes?
Does it explain the increase in secularism?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
As a community, you have a collective, something is coordinating you, there is structure. If you yourself are responsible for organizing your salvation,
Right.
to be motivated and incentivized, and most people are not.
Exactly.
So it's easy to say, forget it.
So yes, I hear Nietzsche in your voice, warning us against the herd. I hear Kierkegaard in your voice, warning us against the public, which Kierkegaard saw as a horrible thing, and Nietzsche saw as the limitation and extinguishment of freedom, of the path, of the individual path. So yes, that's eclecticism, secularism that you mentioned. It's a lot of things. There's a kind of domino effect here. We'll keep talking about it. Thank you. All right. So, again, please stop me and interrupt for questions if you have them. This is not really a formal lecture. Yeah.
More of a comment. I had the good fortune to study Tibetan Buddhism with a great master for 20 years while he was alive. And I watched him as he was sort of dealing with this tension between this inherited Tibetan Buddhism and the emphasis on the group and the norms of the group. And, as I saw him over time, he was increasingly, turning people away, saying, you have to listen. This practice isn't working on you. Maybe you should go somewhere else. Or saying, giving me the transmission to teach, but say, you don't have to teach these teachings. You should just teach whatever arises in your life. Right. Sort of watching how this loosening, this grip of the norms are of what is to bequeath to the next
That's right.
community or to the lineage.
That's right. I don't remember if you were here last time, but we talked about that very process, how after the founder's gone, then what do you have? You have the community, but that's not enough. You have to center that community around something. More often than not, it's a set of codes or laws, which are, frankly, a poor substitute for the founder because they're static, not dynamic. I mean, they don't have to be, but again, we like to concretize, coalesce, stop moving. That's part of this process where the codes can concretize, and then that's an invitation to go searching, right, for yourself. And often this fits in beautifully with the kind of Western development of the human being where we're supposed to rebel against our parents. Well, what do we get taught from the parents? Sometimes, certainly not always, we get taught the tradition, the community, and the codes. It doesn't matter what the codes or the community are. For this culture at this time, I'm talking about in the last 50, maybe 100 years, we're going to reject it as teenagers. Chances are good we're going to reject it. Now, the chances are also pretty good we're going to come back to it in some form. But thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Wouldn't a good founder have somebody under his wing that he was training so as I go out, the other one just pulls in?
Brilliant. Yes, he would. The problem is the followers are pretty much doofuses. They're not, yeah, that's right. They're not cool. So think of Jesus. One of them sells him out, right? The others are like, wait, what are you talking about? So is it a real piece of bread? Right? I mean, they just don't get it. And then, of course, Peter denies him. They all scatter like birds. I mean, the followers are not cool. We talked about Buddhism. The Buddha's followers got in an argument the next day after he died. And I don't have to tell you this story. I think you know it. It's a great question. But I think, since you asked, I think it's because the followers haven't had the experience of the founder. They hear about it, they haven't had it. And if there were loyal followers, even at the beginning, and there are those, there's the Buddha's friend Ananda, and we're going to see Zoroaster had a cousin, and Muhammad had his wife. They just can't keep this up. Because, again, time flows, the experience gets more in the distant. What's in the present are the codes, the the ethical codes, the customs. Now, that's a really good point. That's why we're going to talk about this when we come to Judaism. That's why there's this emphasis in the Pentateuch and the Tanakh of pass this down, you know? And they did with remarkable fidelity. They passed that tradition down, but they knew that you're pushing against the stream, you're swimming upstream with this. Great question. All right. Well, if now you're an individual, you're functioning the way we talked about, kind of on your own path, dipping into communities here, maybe, but it's not essential to the experience, then what is salvation? Or what happens after, right? So there's kind of salvation, which I take to be in the present, and then the afterlife, which is where salvation gets you. I mean, it's one way to look at it. So this answers a question that is already answered in the communal religions, right? Again, Vine Deloria, there's no salvation in tribal religions apart from the continuance of the tribe itself, and the planet itself. That's pretty simple. But if you're an individual, if you're functioning on that level, if you're on your unique path in the world, what happens when your path ends? It's a pretty serious issue. This is what we call the curse of consciousness, right? Ernest Becker talked about this. Lots of Buddhists talk about this. I think it was Jan Kabat-Zinn who said, I wish I were my dog. My dog doesn't worry about enlightenment, right? My dog's just being his dog self. And that's Zen. That's the Buddha, right? Well, it is. It really is. I don't know if you've ever owned a dog, but dogs are totally Buddha. They're just chill. Cats, I don't know, they're more demonic, I think. No, so Ernest Becker talks about this in the denial of death. He says, we're gods who shit. That's what he said. That's a direct quote. We're gods who shit. That's a problem, right? That is a problem because it generates this, not just duality, this fundamental split in your psyche and in the nature of the cosmos, is that you are both God and animal. And he says we never overcome it. Ernest Becker does. He says we try to act out in these little theaters of work and school and home life, these heroic myths, where no matter what we're doing, you know, if we're installing an air conditioner or if we're giving a lecture on Zoroastrianism, we imagine ourselves and project ourselves as heroes because that's the way we deal with our fundamental split between divine and human. I think he's right. So, one answer to this, besides Becker's, his is a kind of dark, and I don't want to say pessimistic, but he's a pretty dark dude. I like him a lot. Another way to deal with this is to say, well, you afterlife, which if we were to do in Latin would be survival. After that we survive. And in the afterlife, the ought to be is what's the case, not what the is. So we eliminate the animal and keep the divine. In the afterlife. Only there. In the individual mode, right? So we create heavens and hells. There's no In the original forms of these religions that we've been studying, there are no heavens and hells. It comes later in almost all of them, but originally it's not there. It's Zoroastrianism that introduces this concept to the Western world. And heaven becomes our greatest hope. Hell becomes our worst fears. There's a great novel by Julian Barnes, the British writer. Jared's going to be upset with me because I'm mentioning a book that he didn't have a chance to order. But he will order it for you in the bookstore, I promise. Called A History of the World in 10.5 chapters. And it ends, it's literally 10.5 chapters. That's right. And it ends with the vision of heaven, where the guy gets everything he wants. Right? Isn't that pretty much heaven for us? All desires fulfilled. Except that desires fulfilled are no longer desires. So this character, he drinks 5 magnums of champagne for breakfast. He has sex with as many and every person he wants to. He eventually takes up golf, shoots an 18 every time at golf. What's left? So he eventually asked to go to hell. Because satisfaction of desire is the end of desire. And what's the end of desire? Again, there are all kinds of problems with the individual path. There's all kinds of wonderful stuff with the individual path, too. Zoroaster is one of the geniuses of world religions. I know many of you haven't heard of him. That's okay. I'm going to tell you about him. So this is his Greek name, Zoroaster, and there he is. You may know that Raphael piece, The School of Athens, with all the philosophers. And you've got Plato and Aristotle coming out, and Plato's pointing up and Aristotle's pointing down. Well, there's Zoroaster. No, that's before Nostradamus. You like Nostradamus? Yeah. Okay. You put him in your painting. But there he is, right? Among the greats. Plato mentioned him. But Plato wanted to go see him, apparently, because he heard of this genius. Again, we're in the legendary realm. Because look at his dates. We don't really know. It's like a 1,000-year point spread there. But yeah, the name means undiluted, Zoros, and then star, the undiluted star. Isn't that? Feel free to name your children Zoroaster. Yeah. We may also know him as Zarathustra. Matthew, how do we know Zarathustra? Nietzsche, his great novel, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. All right, so family man, a wife, 3 sons, 3 daughters. Now, remember, those of you who are here or watched the lecture, remember when we talked about Hinduism, we talked about the Indus River Valley civilization as this amazing civilization of 40,000 people with pretty amazing technology, running water, apartments, etc., trash services. All right, and then after that come another group of people, or we don't really know, it's so old, all we have is archaeological evidence, or that civilization developed into the Aryan civilization. Do you remember that? Which is related etymologically to Iran. So remember I said, tell your neo-Nazi friends that when they say Aryan, they really mean Iranians. I don't mean to imply you have neo-Nazi friends. This is what Zoroaster was going up against, the Aryan religion. Remember in Hinduism, they had the caste system before it became a caste system. They had the stratification in society that was connected to religious virtue. And in fact, the name Aryan means noble ones. So it was a recognition of the superiority of the noble ones. Zoroaster is Persian. He's Iranian. And so he's dealing with the same religious expression, polytheistic, stratified socially, and heavy on ritual. From that environment, think about it, polytheistic, very class-oriented, caste-oriented, and heavily ritualistic. And remember what rituals do. They're very powerful. They put your body in touch with the sacred, and they generate communitas. They generate community. Into that, he introduced a religion of monotheism. Monotheism. Not eliminated, but overturned the rituals, completely undid the deva system, or the various levels of divine beings. And it didn't go well, as it never does. Yeah, he overturned the polytheism. The same is true. We're going to see Muhammad does the same thing. He overturned the polytheism and the oppressive class structure, where priests, you know this story, the aristocracy and the religious leaders have all the power, and they exercise it. He opposed these animal sacrifices, and I didn't mention it in the lecture on Hinduism, but there was this ritualistic use of the Hyoma plant in the Aryan culture that carried over into the Indus River Valley, but also in Persia. He overturned all that and introduced a monotheistic religion based on one primary ritualistic focus, and that was fire, and the notion of an afterlife, a heaven and a hell, and the individualistic approach to religion. So sure, you have communities, sure, you have rituals, but it's your path for good or evil. It's your path, right? If this sounds familiar, it should. It's later Judaism, it's Christianity, it's Islam. This is where that comes from, Zoroaster. So here's the story. You know this story by now, right? How old is he? He's 30. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, how old are you? And he said, 29. I'm like, look out. Something's about to happen. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you're about to have a religious experience and found a religion. He's like, what? No. But you know what I mean. 30's a time, I don't know, there's something about 30. So right, there's a river. There's often a river, right? Buddha, Jesus being baptized, etc. He was doing one of these purification rites, and he saw a shining being. And this was Vohu Manha. This was one of the Amesha Spentas, kind of daemons, kind of in between God, kind of like angels for us, for Christians maybe, or Westerners. This was good mind. So as you can tell already, these are going to be expressions of the divine, individualistic expressions of the divine. Sure enough, Vohu Manha led him to Ahura Mazda, who is the one God, and 5 other Amesha Spentas, holy immortals. Now, notice what happened here, and notice Zoroaster's genius. And this happens often. It happens with Judaism, we'll see. Moses in Judaism does not deny the existence of other gods. And so it's not monotheism that Moses is preaching, it's what we call henotheism, the belief that one God is greater than others. We'll get to that. So when you introduce a monotheistic religion, as Zoroaster or Muhammad did, you better account for the in-between, right? And again, I don't mean this cynically, I mean this functionally. You've got to have some intermediate beings, right? You can't wipe out the whole thing. So just think about ancient Greek religion, which we usually think of when we think of polytheism. And all those gods who represent all those things, right? Athena is wisdom and all that. in the monotheistic version, all those attributes get taken up into one deity. And so the deity is a little inconsistent. He's both merciful and wrathful, right? So again, I'm just speaking functionally. I'm not speaking about any particular religious experience. I'm looking at it from 30,000 feet. That it's really hard to introduce a purely monotheistic religion without something in between. Happened with the Buddha, by the way. They went into polytheistic Buddhism, not the Buddha. They went into polytheistic cultures, and out come other versions of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. So Zoroaster has a bunch of visions. He sees the divine reality of Ahura Mazda and the Amesha and he asks them all these questions. I love this part, right? This too gets carried over into Judaism. This kind of interrogating God, you know. Well, what is this and what is this? And the answers become the Avesta, the basis of the Zoroastrian religion. There's only one creator God, only one God worthy of worship. But also to your point, there's another God. There's another lesser God, right? Because you can't just have the one. So these devas, these intermediate spiritual beings, they loved war and fighting. There have been some connections made to the Greek gods from these devas. Zoroaster hated that, and apparently Ahura Mazda hated it. And he says, these are the followers of Angra Mainyu, the bad god, right? So what comes across as monotheism very quickly gets diluted, not only into the Amesha but also into this other opposer god, Angra Mainyu. I love his name because it sounds like angry. Yeah. God's adversary. Oh, well, we know this story, right? Yeah. The reason you know this story is because Zoroaster introduced it to the religion you're thinking of. Again, he has only this one convert, his cousin. I love this story. I love to think about these stories in real life. So Zoroaster has this amazing vision. He has this conversation with the God, with the only God, and his divine emanations, and he goes and tells his cousin. What do you think that cousin was like? Maybe I've watched too many movies, but I would love to see that on film. The cousin's like, what? There's what? But the cousin just loves him so much, he's like, all right, I'm in. Whatever you say, I'm in. So there was great opposition to this, of course. Zoroaster has to leave after 12 years, and he finds another place, probably in Kurdistan. He dies in his late 70s. I want to keep going to the teachings. See if this sounds familiar. Again, we're talking about 1500 to 500. We're talking about what Jaspers called that axial age, around 600 BCE, where lots of things are happening, from Plato to the Buddha to Lao Tzu to Confucius. Ahura Mazda is omniscient, knows everything, omnipotent, all-powerful, omnipresent, is everywhere. Impossible for us to conceive fully. Creator of life, source of all goodness and happiness. All creation, because it belongs to Ahura Mazda, must be treated with love and respect. We're going to see how that comes around here. The Amesha I already mentioned, are these holy immortals. They are emanations of God. So you can't confuse them with the divine, right? They're not the divine.
Right, they're secondary.
Exactly. So there are the 6 Amesha. A Zoroastrian lives primarily according to this maxim: good words, good thoughts, good deeds. That's not bad, right? That'll work. Good words, good thoughts, good deeds. But what this introduces, of course, that I was getting to before, is it's not monotheism so much as dualism, right? Sure, Angra Mainyu is not the equivalent of Ahura Mazda, but he's pretty close. He's powerful enough to mess around with the world and with you, right? So we know this story, right? Destructive spirit, right? He is the originator of death and evil in the world. Ahura Mazda is perfect, lives in heaven. Angra Mainyu lives in the depths of hell, right? This works out really nicely. By the way, there's another version of this that is not dualistic that you can find in Native American religions and other cultures, and that's the birth of the twins, right? The twins. Look out for twins, because one's going to come along and create a river that flows in both directions, and then the second twin comes along and messes it up, because we know how twins are, right? One twin might create mountains. His younger brother comes along and creates earthquakes. So there's dualism. There's elements of duality. I wouldn't call it dualism in other cultures. This is dualism. And in fact, it's spawned a number of dualistic philosophies, like Manichaeism. Well, again, if you're on the individualistic path, then at death, you have to go to heaven or hell. How do we determine that? Good words, good thoughts, good deeds. Did you do them? Did you do enough of them? Did you do more of the former than the latter? How are we going to figure this out? As I say here, I've said this all along. This is the introduction of later Judaism, to Christianity and to Islam, of heaven and hell. Oh, this is something I wrote a while ago, so I just put it in there. I'm going to ignore it. Well, yes, okay. Well, basically, I wanted to point out that the notion of paradise is a Persian word that means walled city. I've already said some of this. So, right, here's the reason I put it in here. The paradise, the heaven of Zoroastrianism, is attained the fourth day after death by crossing the bridge of the separator. Isn't that awesome? Notice that heaven and hell, so dramatic, right? Very staged. I just mean it's a lot of spectacle. The righteous soul crosses the bridge and is met by a beautiful maiden who is the physical and feminine embodiment of all his good works on earth. He is then escorted into the house of song. Nice. I wonder if Leonard Cohen's there. To await the last day. On this day, everyone will be purified and live in a new world, absent of evil and full of youthful rejoicing. Now, that's the original version of heaven. Everybody gets in. May take some of us longer than others. The bridge of separation, or the Chinvat bridge, is also how you get to hell. So listen to this. This is great. For the righteous, we talked about it, broadens and leads to a beautiful maiden. But for the less than righteous, if the good deeds don't add up, Mithra is there. Wait, what? Mithra? We didn't talk about Mithra, but he's everywhere. He's all over the world. He's got this scale to balance the good and evil deeds done. If the evil deeds prevail, the soul is tormented by an old hag before it falls off the bridge into hell. And these torments, as I say, go well beyond Dante's imagination, but they are like Dante in that you are punished by your sins, not for your sins, and for your sins. All right. So here's the text from the Avesta that deals with this. Zarathustra asked Ahura Mazda, "O thou all-knowing Ahura Mazda, should I urge upon the godly man, should I urge upon the godly woman, and should I urge upon the wicked Deva worshipper who lives in sin, to give the earth made by Ahura, the water that runs, the corn that grows, and all the rest of their wealth?" Ahura Mazda answered, "Yes, you should, Zarathustra." Where are the... See, remember, he asks all these questions. Here they are, some of them. Where are the rewards given? Where does the rewarding take place? Where is it fulfilled? Where do men come, etc.? Ahura Mazda says, when the man is dead, when his time is over, when the wicked, evil-doing Devas cut off his eyesight, on the third night, when the dawn appears and brightens up, when Mithra, the god with beautiful weapons, reaches the all-happy mountains. Beautiful language, right? And the sun is rising. Then the fiend, named Visaresha, O Spitama Zarathustra, carries off in bonds the souls of the wicked Deva worshippers who live in sin. The soul enters the way made by time, and open both to the wicked and to the righteous. And the head of the Chinvat bridge, the holy bridge made by Mazda, they ask for their spirits and souls, the reward for the worldly goods, which they gave away here below. Now, notice how far we've come. We started with Native American religions. We went to the Eastern religions. We didn't see anything like this, right? Well, later, sure, but I'm talking about in the original expression of the religion, nothing like this. Why? Why? Good question. All right, I'm almost finished, and then we'll have some questions. One of the more... There's a couple of things that are notable, or I don't know if they're notable, they're what most people notice about Zoroastrian religion. One is the emphasis on fire. Fire is seen as almost an emanation of God, it's not an Amesha Spenta, but it is a powerful symbol of God. This is related again to Hinduism, the notion of Agni, the fire. Anyway. The other is the towers of silence. If you believe that the earth was created by a good and perfect being, and if you believe that death is a corruption, right? Because everybody eventually gets into heaven, to paradise, and everybody eventually lives forever. So death must be a corruption. Then what do you do with a dead body? Well, death is considered to be the work of Angramanyu, right? So you don't want to pollute the earth with a dead body. What do? You put the dead body in a tower of silence to be exposed to the sun and eaten by birds of prey. There's the Tower of Silence near Yazd, Iran. No longer in use. In fact, most of them are not in use. If you're a Zoroastrian living in Iran, you have to ship the body of your loved one to Mumbai, where there's a forest where this ritual can take place. This is 5 minutes from a documentary on the Towers of Silence.
You're going into a restricted area which, as far as I can ascertain, has not been filmed before. The reason you have this cacophony of crows just now is they actually think that a body is being brought, and therefore they're all excited.
When the body is being devoured by the vultures, the soul feels so comfortable and easy because this nasa has gone out because of the vultures eating, you see.
When we have a shortage of vultures, then the problem arises.
I remember as a kid seeing these big birds circling overhead. Now we don't see a single one around. They've all completely disappeared.
The media has blown this up in a very major way, and this has actually created a fear psychosis.
There is no decline in population. Half the controversy arises out of ignorance.
You may or may not agree, but the facts are quite open. Parsiana publishes every time in its issue a list of births and a list of deaths.
If you look at the birth rates and the death rates, they're disparate. The death rates are higher than the birth rates. So that's mathematics. We are dying out.
It's scary. You always wonder whether will we exist as a community, a century from now.
When you don't have priests to manage the temples, to conduct the rituals, to conduct the ceremonies, that is a real threat to the survival of the religion in the real sense. You will see that for yourself when you go, for instance, to take a look at the madrasas.
These schools are ensuring the future of the whole community.
They have to realize how rich that heritage they are carrying and the legacy they are carrying. That's difficult for a young child to understand.
They are very small children. It is doubtful whether they will follow that profession.
But if all of them are of the right type, who will carry forward the tradition, then the community is safe.
We have one such boy over here who is exceedingly bright. He finished his 7-year course in less than 3 years. And this was indeed a unique thing.
My name is Linsha Magul and my age is 10. I am a priest, a senior priest.
He even qualified to perform the boy ritual, but then they realized that he is too short to reach the bell of the fire temple, and they said let him mature and then he can start tending the fire.
If the child does not actually become a full-time priest, then he's lost.
In my full-time job, I want to be an engineer.
You may or may not have heard the term Zoroastrianism come up in the news in the last year or so. If you did, that's because of the Yazidis in Iraq. These are an offshoot of Zoroastrianism in the sense that Jainism's an offshoot of Hinduism. It draws upon but then adds more to. It's an ancient religion founded in the 11th century. It's got parts of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Islam that you can see there. They are persecuted terribly, have been, just the way Sikhs are persecuted because they combine Hinduism and Islam, and that just never sits well initially and even later with the original religions, Hinduism and Islam, or these three. Interesting story that one of the reasons, the ISIS calls them devil worshippers. I mean, I'm a devil worshiper according to ISIS. So are you. But they have this wonderful story about a fallen angel. You know, Christianity and Judaism kind of have this story of the fallen angel, Lucifer, the angel of light, who kind of over time has become Satan or the devil. Their story has a fallen angel who gets redeemed. He gets welcomed back into the company of God. There's another YouTube video. This is about 3 minutes. It's a woman addressing, a Yazidi woman addressing the Iraqi parliament. You may have seen this. I don't know, it went around about a year ago. Addressing the Iraqi parliament, begging them to do something for their people who were being slaughtered by ISIS.
يعيش هنا يزيديون الآن في جبل سنجار. سيد الرئيس، نذبح تحت يافطة لا إله إلا الله. سيد الرئيس، لحد الآن 500 شاب ورجل يزيدي ذبحوا.
السيدة النائبة، التزمي بالبيان الذي وافقت عليه.
سيد الرئيس، نساؤنا تسبى وتباع في سوق الرق. رجاء أخوان.
سيدة النائبة،
الآن هناك حملة إبادة جماعية على المكون اليزيدي.
سيدة النائبة،
نعم سيد الرئيس، أنا ملتزمة. رجاء سيد الرئيس،
نعم.
أهلي يذبحون كما ذبح كل العراقيين. ذبح الشيعة والسنة والمسيحيين والتركمان والشبك، واليوم يذبح اليزيديين. أخوان، نحن نريد بعيدا عن كل الخلافات السياسية، نريد تضامنا إنسانيا. أنا أتكلم هنا باسم الإنسانية. انقذونا 48 ساعة 30,000 عائلة محصورة في جبل سنجار بدون ماء بدون أكل، يموتون 70 طفل لحد الآن ماتوا من العطش والاختناق. 50 شيخ مات من الوضع المتردي. نساؤنا تسبى جاريات وتباع في سوق الرق. سيد الرئيس، نطالب البرلمان العراقي بالتدخل الفوري لإنقاذ هذه المذبحة. 72 حملة إبادة جماعية على اليزيديين، والآن تكرر في قرن 21. نذبح، نبيد، يباد دين كامل على وجه الأرض. أخوان، أنا أناشدكم باسم الإنسانية أن تنقذونا. سيد الرئيس، أريد.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا جناب النائب. السيد عباس البياتي. شكرا.
So you see, that's a plea. It's a very human plea. But it's also a plea of a persecuted minority that dared to blend religions. So notice what she did there. I mean, of course, that was a very impassioned and powerful speech, but notice what she did rhetorically. She said, Christians, Shia, Sunni, tried to put themselves in the same category. Because they are, but they're not treated as such. Zoroastrianism is, the textbook I love more than any is Hopfi's Religions of the World. And he, or they, dropped Zoroastrianism in the latest edition. And I know why they did. There's only 120 to 150,000 Zoroastrians left. They're living in a modern world. They have children later, they have fewer children. It's also hard to do the towers of silence. It's just hard, right? I mean, where are you going to be able to lie a body out and let vultures eat it? Not many places. So I don't know, I kind of feel like they should be represented. They offered so much to Western religion, and Zoroaster was a genius, a religious genius, that we shouldn't forget them, you know, and we shouldn't forget the Yazidis who are an offshoot of them. So really interested that you showed up for this, possibly not knowing what it was all about. I hope you do now. Thank you. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Thank you. So you said everybody gets into heaven.
Yeah.
What is the delay, sir? Purgatory?
A practical man. Yeah, there's a sense of you've got to pay.
Purgatory, so out of...
Yeah, it's a kind of purgatory. It's like you've got to account for these deeds not weighing up. And so we got to put something on you to pay for it. It's a kind of imprisonment, right?
But not reincarnation.
No. That's a good point, though. I mean, we're now past that. So there's no point. When it's an individual path, it's a path to infinity. So it's an infinite heaven, or, as we'll see with Christianity and Islam, it's infinite hell. Good question. Yes?
In the very little I've heard about Zoroastrianism before, I feel like I almost always hear about it in relation to the material plane. I wasn't even sure what the term necessarily meant. But
I haven't seen that phrase per se, but it does make sense, because once you move into an individualistic mode in religion and you kick in salvation and the afterlife, then what matters, ironically, is the material plane, is the here and now. Because these deeds you do, good words, good thoughts, good deeds, they happen here and now. Now remember, in Buddhism, here and now is Maya. It's illusion. If you are attached to it, you are ignorant, and you will stay attached to it through samsara, through the cycling of the lives. This is totally flipped now. And so you have to take care of business in the material plane to get to the immaterial plane. Which is an irony that not a few people have noticed, including one Karl Marx, for example. He was very suspicious of the reward coming later. Let's just say that. Yeah.
Could you read us the last one at the core of Yazidis?
At the core of the Yazidis' marginalization is their worship of a fallen angel, Melek Tawas, or the peacock angel. This is the angel who sinned against God but was redeemed. The peacock angel. Oh, sorry. One of the 7 angels that take primacy in their belief. So angels now appear. We're in Western religion, so in Islam they're going to be called jinn. In Christianity they're going to be called angels. We like to have in monotheism, or henotheism, however you put it, we like to have these intermediate beings. So this is a story of one of those intermediate beings who fell because of his sin and pride, but was redeemed, unlike Lucifer, who fell and was not. Did I see a hand somewhere? Okay. Yes?
I had a question on Mithra.
Yeah.
So within Zoroastrianism, it's placed in hell, or do they become devil in that context, or are they more gatekeeper?
The people in hell?
No, Mithra.
Oh.
Is Mithra sort of devoted to?
Yeah.
Has it occurred in any other religion?
Yeah, Mithra's this, like I mentioned, is this, he's everywhere. And here in Zoroastrianism, he is exactly as you said. He's the gatekeeper. Jung and Campbell would call him a threshold guardian, right? So he lets you pass or not. He might be the ferryman in the underworld in Greece. But yeah, he gets put to use here. His gatekeeper function gets put to use in this eschatological scene. So it's a really interesting adaptation of Mithra, right? Who appears Christ-like, actually, in Egypt and Greece and other places. And now he's like, he holds the balance in ways.
Due to being that sort of archetype, is he also characterized as being sort of a trickster in Zoroastrianism, or?
Wow, what a great question. No, he's very serious. The question was about, is he a trickster? He's a trickster in other places, for sure. So what's a trickster? We didn't talk about this with Native American religions that I recall. We could have and maybe should have. A trickster is Hermes, who is designed, whose function is to trick human beings. And in so doing, in Native American cultures, he teaches a lesson, right? Now, in Greek culture, Hermes is both the trickster god and the god of interpretation and communication, hermeneutics, right? So I find that very interesting, that the god of communication is a trickster god in Greece, right? Meaning language is slippery. You can be tricked through language. Again, Mithra, these gods, especially Mithra, get put to their own uses. So I think people who worship Mithra in Egypt or Greece would not recognize this Mithra. Good question again. Yes?
When they are they're marginalized because of the worship of the fallen angel. But does this fallen angel also show up in Islam, in the belief of Islam?
I don't recall a fallen angel in Islam. It's a good question. If someone knows, please, feel free to correct me.
The reason why they're marginalized is because the revisionist religions like to assume that they're worshiping Al-Shaitan, which is a different jinn entirely. They really just don't know their exegesis from a whole different.
Right. So, as is often the case here, he's arguing that the exegesis was the word he used, the interpretation of the sacred text is flawed, right? And in fact, that's a whole other thing that we're going to get to with Islam is, and we've already talked about, you have the founder's experience, you have the myths that turn to scripture, and how do we read them? Right? So that's what he's saying, is that this is a disagreement over how to read a text. We know about that, right? Texts are there to prevent that very thing, but they generate it. Welcome to Hermes, the trickster god. Yes?
What was the belief system before Zoroaster?
Right. It was that Aryan religion that gave birth in one way or another to Hinduism in the Indus River Valley. Same here. In fact, there are arguments that it's the same peoples moving from Persia to the Indus River Valley. But it's hard to say. But it's very similar. And very similar to Greek religion. Similar set of daemons, intermediate beings that mess with humanity.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. Actually, one is Parsis?
Yeah.
Same people?
Yeah, in India.
In India.
In India.
The other one was almost short. Last year's Parliament of Religions in Salt Lake City. And the Dalai Lama was supposed to be there. He wasn't, but there was representatives from everywhere. Did the Zoroastrians have a presence at that Parliament of Religions last year?
I don't know. I hope they did, because they're in trouble in all kinds of ways.
Are there any in the United States?
I'm sure there are a few, but they're mostly in India and Iran. So I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to tell you that in India they're called Parsis. All right. Next week we move to Judaism. And what we do is we circle back around now to the sacred. So in the first lecture discussion on the sacred, we talked about awe and ecstasy, space-time and ecstasy. This time, We're going to continue the lecture, the discussion on the sacred, with anthropomorphism and tradition. Anthropomorphism, the making human of something that is not human, which in this case is God. All right, thank you.